Okay, David, I expect you thought when you sort of mentioned about the landed a few gambles that we'd sort of gone past that, but obviously we haven't, because I'd like to know a bit more. You landed some pretty shrewd gambles.
Yeah, we owned several horses with Tim Vaughan well, solely with Tim Vaughan actually, and landed some nice touches with some of our horses. We used to buy horses from, it seems really simple now, but we used to buy horses from in our view, which we could improve. Tim could get fitter. We used to buy him from relatively low-grade trainers, low-grade animals, and Tim would try and improve them. If we saw that improvement, then we'd try and line them up for punts.
So that was the Martin Pipe model, basically.
Yeah, Tim was a huge fan of Martin Pipe, made me read his book as a result of that. So yeah, following that model.
So can we mention Am I Blue?
Yeah, Am I Blue would grab the headlines as well. It did grab the headlines. It was front page of the Racing Post. It was a horse we did own. That would be the one that would be in our small circle. That'd be the one that kind of stood out. But it wasn't actually the most lucrative. There was much shorter priced horses which we backed, which were more lucrative for us. But Am I Blue was the headline grabber, mainly because we kind of mishandled it to an extent.
So tell us, how did you mishandle it? For those that don't know.
Maybe a difficult one to answer, but just the public communications around it were badly managed.
Okay, so so when you got these horses, Tim said, "Yeah, I've definitely put a couple of pounds on this one." I mean, were you the mastermind behind the form, looking at what sort of race you thought you'd be able to win? You know, obviously people think that these horses just turn up and you land a gamble, but there must be a fair bit of planning goes on behind it.
Yeah, I would have been involved in the race planning. Tim would have been involved as well. Would have spent a lot of times at the gallops each morning. A young man then, no kids, so could go and watch the horses on the gallops, make sure that we saw visible improvements and we were confident around that. And then the race planning would follow, as well as trying to organise how do we get on, which is always the major challenge.
So would you have had your head in the form book a lot those days anyway? Did you pay like a day-to-day interest in it all?
Yeah. I wouldn't have been a form student over my life. I think I would have had periods of being a form student. In the very early days when I kind of first started working for Dad, used to kind of review Bobby Love's tissues and that type of stuff. So I used to be involved in form from a very young age. Then moved away from it to an extent, still followed the point-to-points quite closely. And then really picked it back up with the racehorse ownership, and would have been involved in study then. With the general in-play betting, wouldn't have relied on form study at all. You would have had a view of the horses because you're pretty much watching every race every day, but didn't have a particular strong grasp on the form when we weren't involved in the racehorse ownership. Okay,
so when you were a professional punter in the more traditional sense of the word, i.e., I know it probably overlapped, but not betting in running, did you have sort of a network of other shrewdies who helped each other, or were you a bit of a lone wolf?
Always been surrounded by shrewd gamblers, I would say, just by the nature of the exchange office and just the world we lived in. But I would say pretty much a loner. One person I think has been really important, seen as a bit of a mentor, is Martin Davis, who you'll know, who's a reserved Welsh bookmaker, far shrewder than he lets on. I think he has a real strong grasp of the fundamentals of betting, and took a lot of guidance from Martin.
Okay, now you said you're on and off form student. So did most well, you've answered it really, most of the opportunities arose because you got horses that were better than the capability had been brought out at that point. So you've improved horses, so a lot of your profit would have been knowing what you knew, and rather than delving into the form book.
Yeah, I mean, the form book will play a role in terms of like you check the entries in terms of placement and everything, and then making a decision on what the price was relative to the field just before on the day. But yeah, no, the real, I mean, the edge, I guess, was just ensuring, being confident around we'd seen that improvement at home.
I suppose in those days, with the betting exchanges at its height, you could pretty much get what you wanted on. How price sort of sensitive were you?
No, still very price sensitive, and as much as you could get on, it's very, very difficult to keep those whispers quiet. So you look on Sporting Life the day before and the tissue price would be 20 to 1. You look on the exchange as soon as the market opened, it'd be 14, be a couple of £5 nibbles here there, and you wake up in the morning, it's a 7 to 2 chance, and you haven't got involved yet. So So
Where were those leaks coming from then, do you think?
Just I wish I knew. It was always impossible to keep it quiet, right? I think we did relatively well in some cases to keep it as quiet as we could, but not in every case. There was always the price incrementally went down overnight.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you had a team of sort of people getting on in betting shops. So I'm assuming that when these gambles with Tim Vaughan were going on, you were using those guys.
Generally, yes.
But they wouldn't have known the night before.
No.
So, I mean, what other sort of business were they doing for you?
Yeah, stuff I mentioned before, like this is, I'd say, relatively standard fare for that age. It would have been taking advantage of stale prices in the price-wise grids, Betfred pushes, each way handicaps, 18 to 20 winner handicaps or whatever, depending on shapes of races, with short price favourites. So playing the place markets. Golf was good from a place perspective. And then again, as I said before, just trying to identify surrounding edges. So we give the example of you could take prices on the tote guides for American racing for a nice long period in Coral, and we managed to execute that really well and get some decent money out of that.
So was it an arbing thing? Were you punting them and leaving it?
No, we never arbed just relied on the assumed positive EV. You obviously have swings then as a result. If you're arbing to the scale we were betting, the cash flow requirements are really, really large. And I think you actually lose money over a period. You get that stability, you get to keep your head a bit more. But I think it's negative EV to be arbing on the exchanges. We used to keep all our bets.
Okay, so how big of a logistical exercise was it? I mean, making sure all the guys had money, knowing you could trust them would have been a big thing.
Yeah.
Did you ever get knocked?
No, it didn't. Been knocked in other areas of our betting life, I guess, but not in this bit. Trust is massive. Really lucky that we had some close friends as well as a nice network of connections from the racecourse who used to rely upon. In terms of a logistical exercise, I look back at it now and I'm amazed really, but it wasn't overly scientific. It was text messages, pen and paper, and probably lots of inaccuracies along the way, but still managed to make it pay.
Were there a lot more ricks in those days, you think, from the bookmakers' side?
Yeah, I would say so. I think not so much the ricks actually, just the ability to get on was different. That's the difference. Like my fundamental philosophy around gambling really is it's value times by volume, and I think the value isn't that much different now. It's just the ability to get volume on was more then. Okay,
now for the benefit of bookmakers and punters probably seething that there's a chap sat in front of me that all he's ever done is win. If I mention a grand on Liverpool 66-1, Jordan Spieth and Cal Adan, tell us about a few bad beats.
Yeah, Liverpool hurt, and that was combined with Jordan Spieth's when he folded on the Sunday of the Masters. But and Cal Adan was a horse we owned, which fell at the last, and we really had a go. But the bad beats individually are kind of fine. You can kind of stomach them. It's the prolonged periods which used to really hurt. It's just a kind of culmination of prolonged losses, not the individual bad beats. If you take a bad beat when you're on a nice run, you kind of relatively cheerfully rely on, as long as you had value. When you're losing, you don't take it quite so well.
So were you having the volume of bets that made you think of it as a stream of sort of activity, or was each punt a separate little thump that if it went wrong you felt?
Yeah, I look at it in the whole, I guess, on individual days. So if a Saturday morning, for example, if we sent a team out on a Saturday morning to take advantage of price-wise, whatever it may be, wouldn't be so concerned with the individual race or the selection, would be very concerned with the return relative to the stake at the end of the day.
Now, I'm guessing when things were bad, you must have had some sleepless nights. I mean, how did you keep the self-belief going when one thing after another was going wrong?
Yeah, I had loads of really prolonged bad runs. I think every pro-punter has. I speaking honestly, I think you lose that self-belief. But I think you wake up in the morning and there's no other job to go to, right? There's no other career to walk into, so there's nothing else to go and do. Eventually, variance turns in your favour. You gather your confidence again, and you inevitably go on those good runs. But speaking honestly, I think in those real dark moments of prolonged losing runs, I think you lose your self-belief.
And was there anybody that you could sort of confide in and sort of get a bit of a confidence boost from in those times?
I used to speak to a lot of people, a lot of my friends who were generally doing the same thing. So seeing them win whilst you were having bad runs, gave you some element of confidence. Also added to your frustration as well. What am I doing wrong that they're not? But yeah, lucky to have worked with my friends generally, so some support there.
And would you say that one of your greatest skills was knowing when an edge had blunted and it was time to move on?
No, I actually think the opposite. I think I stayed in the in-play space for far too long, stayed in the exchange office in particular for far too long. Maybe a sense of loyalty or nostalgia that drove that, but wasn't really until... But I think we've definitely learned from that, and now I think maintaining kind of agility and optionality, I think, is really important to us. But yeah, I think I'd probably be guilty of taking too long to realise an edge had gone previously, but I think we've learned from that.
Can you sort of mention any angles that really were good and then weren't?
Yeah, I mean, look, from a betting and running perspective, it was all about feed latency. So, like mentioned before, satellites, FaceTimes. I didn't go to boxes myself, but finding those latency edges. We were catalysed by COVID. I went out and got my commercial drone pilot's license, so we were one of the first into the drones and got that set up during COVID. So that was really good for a short period. And then in terms of the punting, alongside that, nothing really stands out as like extraordinary value. It was more about just grinding away the 7-4, getting 7-4, those 6-4 chances continually. But the edge finding from the in-play space was more around identifying the feed latencies, less so the execution of your betting strategy.
And just one final question for this point, but that very important bit about positive EV and stuff, you made something 7-4, you had to be confident that you priced it right and that they priced it wrong. Yeah. So where did you, I mean, that skill you learned from the early days on course?
No, I think the on course is more about understanding margins, books, knowing that evens, twos and fives is 100%, that type of thing, identification of sharps and good customers and all the rest of it. I think the identification of 7-4 chance being 6-4, that wasn't through, my own compilation of pricing. That was using, speaking pretty simple, right? But it's using Betfair's guides, using each way mechanics to work out that you're getting relative value in the place market, and maybe taking a negative EV on the win side, but that'll be overcompensated by the positive EV on the place side. So yeah, nothing overly scientific and that hundreds of other people haven't done.